Hello friends, welcome, thank you for joining us here at Beyond the News. This is a scary Halloween broadcast on the 31st of October. We're going to tell today a very scary story of how a once proud nation fell into tyranny, and we're going to be joined today by our one and only favourite guest, Mr. Roger Hayes. We're going to get him on in a few minutes. As ever, we are experiencing current technical difficulties, so if this is going out live, I'll be very impressed. Hopefully this will be caught on the archive section of our podcast as well, but I just want to check that before I get Roger on today that we're going to be archived correctly, because this is going to be a brilliant broadcast and I'm really looking forward to listening to what Roger Hayes has to say. We're going to be talking about the Iraq War today. We're going to be talking about the speech that President Eisenhower made back on January the 17th, 1961, warning of the military-industrial complex, i.e. wars for profit, and how the Iraq War plays into that. We're also going to be talking, I'm going to go out of left field, see if Roger wants to talk about the declarations and conventions on the United Nations website signed in 1976. It's a weather weapons treaty in which nations around the world say that they're not going to use weather weapons against each other. We're also going to talk about CNBC admitting, effectively all slaves to central bankers, which is something that I've been saying throughout our number of broadcasts. So, without any further ado, live on air. Doesn't sound good, does it?
Hello.
Hello, Roger. It's Jim. How you doing? You all right?
I'm well, Jim. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you indeed. There's a glutton of things that I'd like to pick your brains on today. Everything from the Iraq War and the military-industrial complex down to the banking system, as ever. So, what I'd like to start first with is your court case. How's that proceeding?
I've a bit of a delay at the moment. I've been pretty busy going around the country, got presentations, etc. But I am making some progress, and I imagine that something will be action probably within the next couple of weeks. That when you say my court case, in fact, the way I'm handling this now is I'm taking out private prosecution against the judge who put me in prison without proper court hearing, without any evidence, without any representation. As far as I'm concerned, that was a criminal act, and we can no longer rely on the courts to serve justice. We have to go about business and, if you like, take out private prosecutions. That's how scary this whole thing is now.
Yes, I said... I don't know if you listened on the internet before I brought you on, but I said today's Halloween special will be a scary story of how a once great nation fell into tyranny and how an innocent man can be arrested without the correct arrest warrant and put in prison for 19 days. And that is your story, is it not, Roger?
Well, that's right. And what's scary is that, you know, the people who are actually at the front line, they don't understand it either. I mean, the three policemen had turned up on the morning to arrest me. Nice people, civil, well-behaved, polite, all of the usual stuff that you'd expect in a constable, but they just didn't understand what they were doing. And when they flashed a piece of paper in front of me with the word warrant on it, I said to them, it's not a warrant. There is no signature by a judge. There is no name that even purports to be the name of a judge. There's no stamp on it from a court, and therefore it is just a piece of paper. Now, their response was, as far as they were concerned, it was a warrant. And they don't know what a warrant is. Now, if people can turn up with pieces of paper with the word warrant on it, it doesn't matter whether it's delivered by a policeman or anybody else, that there's a process they have to go through, and it's called the lawful process. And if they're getting to the point where these documents are now being published by the claimants themselves, these warrants are being issued by either the police or they're being issued by the councils, they're actually not coming from the courts. It's extraordinary. And we've got to the position now where we've got private enterprise, which is issuing its own warrants, and then getting the police to act as heavies to enforce them. That's where we're at. Now, that's tyranny, isn't it?
That is the very definition of tyranny, selective enforcement. I mean, there are a number of bankers that we could go on about that haven't had their collars felt for anything, in which a number of people have been ripped off for absolutely billions, if not trillions of pounds, and you get your collar felt for a council tax bill in which, under UK law, you're the expert in this, in saying that all business transactions require a contract, and that was the basis of your case. It wasn't that you didn't want to pay council tax,
the thing
that
you
you
raised,
said it
which
was
is
in
very
fact
important,
illegal.
is if bankers actually act criminally, that it's deemed that they have broken some form of banking rule. But no, they've actually broken the law. This LIBOR scandal is somebody manipulated, that's fraud, manipulated the system for gain. That is fraud. That is a criminal offence. And all they did was they actually fined the banks. And who's going to pay the bill? You and I.
Yes.
Why isn't the head of the various banks, why aren't they in jail charged with fraud, a criminal conspiracy? And this is the issue that we've got now, is wherever a crime is committed by somebody in the institution, what they do is they say they've broken regulations. You remember the politicians. When the politicians fiddled their expenses, they breached parliamentary protocol or something to that effect. No, they broke the law. So there is most definitely one law for us and a set of regulations or rules for them. And when they breach their regulations, they get a slap on the wrist, whereas we potentially will go to prison.
And that is the very essence of tyranny. The one has the power to make selective enforcement, and you put the centralisation of power with those who have the ability to make that selective enforcement, and they've decided to select Roger Hayes and not for the banking system and for all their crimes, LIBOR, the drug running from HSBC. We could go on and on, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why it's so important that we understand what our Constitution is, that we have the institutions uphold the law, uphold the rule of law, and not start sidestepping it by coming up with a new set of rules and regulations that don't or at least give them a dispensation. And that's effectively what's been going on. One of the clever tricks that they have used in the past number of decades is they started to refer to parliamentary sovereignty. And what I say is, no, Parliament is not sovereign. The sovereignty remains with the people. It is the people who are sovereign. Parliament serves the people. Now, when you have a Parliament that starts to say to us that it is sovereign, it can do anything, that's where the rot sets in. And, of course, that's exactly what has happened. And there was something else that we should have been alerted to many, many years ago. It was Chief Justice Stewart who warned about the attempts by the politicians to have a Ministry of Justice. They said there's one thing that should never, ever happen, is that there should be a breakdown of the separation of powers. And that's, of course, exactly what's happened. We got three breakdowns. First and foremost, the royal assent, which was the exclusive authority of the monarch on behalf of the people to keep the politicians in their boxes. That has been stolen by the politicians, and now ministers, they wield the royal assent as though they own it on behalf of Parliament, and that's been stolen from the people. And the second arena where with the separation of powers has been impacted upon is with the actual Ministry of Justice. So you now have a politician who can meddle in the judiciary, and of course the extension of that was the Supreme Court, taking the authority away from the House of Lords. And the whole thing is about a breakdown of our Constitution, and in that breakdown, we, the people, are losing out, and it's now basically a step further towards a parliamentary dictatorship, where the politicians control the judiciary, the politicians control the executive, and of course the politicians control the legislature. It is a parliamentary dictatorship.
Well,
Very subtle tyranny, but tyranny nevertheless.
let me just say that it is really a parliamentary dictatorship, because it doesn't matter whether you vote for Labour, Lib Dem, Tories. They're all pro-bank bailout, which means they're all pro-austerity measures. So it doesn't matter whether you vote for the red, blue or yellow team. You will have your local schools and hospitals closed in order to give 500 billion to the banks free of charge that they can lend back to us at interest, currently at 42 billion a year, Roger.
Well, I call it agenda politics, which means that, you know, it doesn't matter who you still get the same agenda.
Yes.
I think we've got to start, certainly people like you and I have started to realise that it doesn't matter who you vote for, we get the same agenda and the same policies, and we know what those policies are directed towards. We've now got international regulations, rules being applied to us. And I'm aware of things like the local Citizens Act, in which we can now have the local councils impose legislation on us that's come effectively from United Nations decisions or agreement, government level agreements that they've not gone through our Parliament. So these things are happening at international level. We're being subjected to rules and regulations imposed upon us through our local council, and they're going to arrest us at our doorsteps and do exactly to other people what they did to me. If you don't pay these international taxes that they're going to impose upon us, it's straight to prison without parliamentary scrutiny.
And there was in the European Parliament, there was an MEP, Gerald Batten, and he stated your case in the European Parliament. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that YouTube clip.
Yeah, I mean, it was brought to my attention, and I'm enormously grateful to Gerald Batten for his interjection there and bringing up in the European Parliament. That's a talking shop. I greatly appreciate him doing that, because it obviously went around the world also. But also, it's a record of what's been going on, that somebody in this country can be arrested on a phony piece of paper that claims to be a warrant that isn't a warrant, not issued by a court, not stamped by a court, not signed by the judge or a judge. You can then stand in a dock where there's no evidence presented, that you do not have the opportunity to represent yourself, argue the case, or even see what the charges are, and within less than 5 minutes been thrown in jail for how many days it is. And the important thing about that, and it is very important, is that can happen to anybody for a simple offence of non-payment of a council tax or a parking fine or a new carbon tax that's going to be introduced shortly. So, we're heading into very, very dangerous waters now, and we all need to wake up and be aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. For my listeners, I'd just like to play this 1-minute clip of Gerard Batten talking about your case in the European Parliament. Just so if listeners are aware, this is a very real case. This is a very real example of tyranny. This has been brought up not only by yourself, Roger, but by MEP Gerald Batten for the UKIP party. You can see it on YouTube for yourself. So if you just excuse me, Roger, I don't know if you can listen there, but I'm going to just play this 1-minute clip for my listeners. Here we are.
For 1 minute, Mr. Batten.
This was made on Strasbourg, 4th of July
President.
2012.
Since we are discussing justice, I would like to raise a disturbing issue that has come to my attention today. Mr. Roger Hayes has been summarily sentenced to 21 days in Liverpool prison following a cursory appearance before a magistrate on Monday. Mr. Hayes was arrested at 8:30 a.m, taken to court, sentenced and locked up by 6 p.m. that evening. No members of the public or witnesses were reportedly allowed at his hearing. Mr. Hayes' family have been reportedly...
Excuse me, may I ask you to speak to the micro? Excuse me.
Hayes is the founder of the
Mr. Batten.
Group and is a prominent tax protester. His case arises from his withholding of council tax on a legally based objection that the revenue is being illegally used. Mr. Hayes' imprisonment may well be illegal under English common law. Mr. Hayes must be freed without delay and the issues behind it widely publicised.
So I don't know if you could hear that okay.
Yes, I did hear that, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I think
this is a real case.
You can add a little bit to that, because obviously what's going on in the courts is very disturbing. And we all might imagine that the courts are running the way they're supposed to, but they're not. Gerard Batten mentioned under English common law, of course, we don't have access to common law courts anymore. These courts that are being run in the country are administrative hearings. They're not actually proper common law courts. And people need to understand that that's one of the things which we're very, very concerned about. Now, I went to assist some friends in some of our members in the Flintshire court, and we went to court to represent to the magistrates the fact that the court itself had not issued a summons. And of course, the process is that if somebody has a legitimate claim, a debt claim, as the council said they had, there is a process they're supposed to go through. And the process is they're supposed to lay a complaint. That's the first thing they do at the court. And the court then has an obligation to study the material and issue a summons if they feel there's a case to answer. The important point about it is the court is supposed to issue the summons. Now, what we know as a fact is not happening. These so-called administrative hearings are not issuing the summons. They're being issued by the council. We brought this up in front of the magistrates, and we brought out the law books, etc., and we said, this court has been advised absolutely without doubt that the court has not issued the summons. And the court there and then admitted it did not issue the summons. And we then advised the magistrates they had no choice but to throw out the case because there was no summons. They just went ahead anyway. And this is the frightening part of it. The courts, although they had not issued a summons, they still proceeded with the case. Now, it's actually a perversion of justice. And this is how they don't care. So these courts are no longer delivering justice for the people. They are just acting as a control tool, a tool of oppression just to get money from the people. It's appalling.
It is absolutely appalling. So you're moving forward with a private prosecution because everyone has the right to innocent until proven guilty. That is the very essence of a fair and free society. Now, if you have been arrested without a warrant, is that not kidnapping?
Yes, it is. That's exactly right. And again, the scary part about this is the police didn't know. Now, we do have another case going on at the moment where an individual was, if you like, arrested by the police without warrant. They dragged him from his home in front of his wife and his children and took him down to the police station. And he has now taken out a private prosecution against those police, and they are in the dock. And you know, this is the sort of thing that we've all got to start doing. He made a complaint to the police themselves, but they'd ignored it. And, of course, the police think that they themselves are above the law. That's the culture that's developed in this country. We saw the Hillsborough disaster, and what happened there is the police did a cover-up. 168 police statements were altered. That's a criminal offence. Why aren't there 168 police officers in the docks? If we alter evidence, we would be in prison. Why aren't these? And what they're just saying is, it was just a procedural issue. And the chief constable who was eventually involved in that case has just resigned. And I think this is appalling. He's been allowed to duck out with his pension, having committed a criminal offence. He again should be in the dock. And this is what's happening. All the institutions, the courts are breaking the law, the police are breaking the law, the politicians are breaking the law, and the bankers are all breaking the law. But they are not held to account. They're getting away with absolute corruption.
And that's the only way you're going to stop these people is instead of them saying they keep taking the mickey out of us persistently and repeatedly, and then when we catch them they say, oh, you've got us, I just won't do it again. You actually need to punish them. You need not only to punish them because it's the lawful thing to do, but because it sends the deterrent to future potential offenders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, you say, I say. I mean, the point is that it's been going on for a long, long time. They become totally arrogant. They know they can get away with it because they have got away with it. And you know, I have to say that on that count, the reason they're getting away with it is because we have not done anything about it.
Yes.
We've been complacent. We've allowed them to get away with it. It's no good shrugging our shoulders and saying, oh, that you know, that all politicians are corrupt.
Yeah.
You can't trust them. I'm not voting. There's no good doing that. We've now got to take action against them, and that's the basic principle behind what the British Constitution Group is doing. It's actually taking action, and in fact, one of our initiatives now to be launched from the 24th of November at our annual conference is what we're referring to as Magna Carta 2012, which is a program, a 3-year program, and we'll be declaring sovereign governance on the 15th of June 2015. We are going to govern ourselves. And the reason that we're going to do that is because we can no longer trust the actual political system itself. We're going to get away from party politics, and we want to start looking towards policy politics, where we can actually rely on policies to govern properly.
Yeah. Now, most police are good people, so if you could change the rot at the top, I'm certain that the police that are good people on the streets that I meet, the 99% of them good people, we can build a better country very easily. We just need to get rid of this very corrupt elite at the top, banking, government, and the top of the police force.
Yeah, I think, even the top of the police force, even if you change that, if people who come in over them don't understand what's going on, that you're not going to get the changes. The problem that you've got is that your average Bobby on the beat does not understand common law. All they understand, they don't know the difference between common law and legislation. They need to know the difference. And it's not subtle, it's a massive difference, and they should understand. So when common law comes into conflict with legislation, they should know the difference so that they can actually come down on the side of the superior law, which is common law. And I could give you an example. My description of common law is it protects our liberties, our property, and our freedom. So it protects, whereas legislation enforces and controls. There's the subtle difference between, not subtle, there's the distinction between the two of them. And I think the police need to understand that when they're enforcing legislation, they can do so conditional upon it not imposing itself on our common law rights. And I think that is a very, very big thing that we need to do, is to make sure that the police are properly trained and educated vis-a-vis the law versus legislation.
Well, we're on the subject of police and the new laws coming. What do you make of the police commissioner votes coming up in a couple of weeks? I had on last week front runner for Dorset police commissioner, very, very good human being, Martin Underhill. I would ask anyone down in the Dorset area to vote for him. He's running as an independent purely because he understands that all the politicians, he was trying to debate them on any issues, and the politicians were saying, we're not going to debate you till the results are in, and they all clubbed together as one, so he had to run as an independent. What do you make of the new police commissioner voting system coming in a couple of weeks, Roger?
Well, the first thing I would say is that, is the commissioner going to really have any authority? Because is the commissioner going to get access to confidential information? Is the commissioner going to be given all that is asked for from senior police officers, or are they just going to close him down? Are they going to ignore him? That's probably the most crucial question that's not being answered. And I would suspect that it's just a sleight of hand to once again pretend that we're getting proper democracy in place, but in reality the power will not shift from behind the closed doors of senior police officers. That's what I suspect will really happen. And I'm going to be quite interested to talk to some of these commissioners and have the conversation with them. What powers do you think you have, and what powers actually do you have? It may very well be the case that the commissioner can sack certain constables, but it's going to be enormously difficult to do so. And meanwhile, in reality, on the ground, will that commissioner just be an empty shell, not able to do anything, but once again, us being fooled into thinking we've got more democracy, where in fact we've got less.
I put that question to Martin Underhill, and he was of the opinion that if you could get enough independent police commissioners on the committee, then you could indeed lobby government or put them in a difficult position where you could go public and say, we have lobbied government for this agenda and they're not listening to us. So if they do start to stonewall them, as you suggested, and which is what I think they do, if you get enough decent independent candidates like the one I had on last week, then they can either name or shame the government and go public with things, and that way force an agenda.
If we're talking about an independent commissioner, and if we're talking about government, why don't we simply just cut to the chase and not lobby Parliament, but how about arrest them? Because Parliament has enacted the transfer of our sovereignty to a foreign power.
Yes.
That's against our constitution.
And just to back you up on that, there are articles where the EU has taken our 350 million of our money and said to the UK Parliament that you don't get a say in where that's going. And that's just the way it is. And all the parties have said, oh, that's wrong, but we'll just bend over to it.
We give as well, we control that. And you know, once you have got a unelected institution that's taking our money without our permission, without our say-so, etc., that is a criminal act, and that government is responsible for that. But not just government, Parliament is responsible for it. You don't get any members of Parliament standing up and voicing opposition to all of this. Or you do occasionally. Some of the UKIP people, but that's at Parliament. That's at European level, not at local level. So we've got an extraordinary situation where members of Parliament have committed acts of treason, transferring our national sovereignty to a foreign body without the people's consent or permission. That is a criminal act. So I would like to see some of these police commissioners, put their money where their mouths are, not lobby Parliament. How about we instruct the Chief Constable to arrest them?
Yes, and that could be done. And just to give you an idea on the Parliament thing, there was a point in my brain but it's just passed now. You were talking about arresting these people. On the treason account, if someone has had their schools and hospitals cut to give money to the EU, which will undoubtedly occur for 350 million, if someone's health is affected by that because a local ward has been shut and they have to travel somewhere else and they die in the ambulance or something like that, if a British person has died as a result of those people choosing to give money to a foreign power such as the EU, that really is the essence of treason. You have chosen to kill a British person, or the results of your actions have resulted in a death of a British person, because you've chosen to give money and power to a foreign institution. That is treason, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'll give you another example where the government is claiming it can't afford to properly defend the country and is therefore grounding our Air Force, having our ships broken up, not replacing aircraft carriers and so on and so forth, and closing some of the oldest and best regiments that this country has ever had. That also is treason. And the thing about this, Jim, is they're claiming there isn't enough money. That is a lie. That's an outrageous lie. Because if you understand the money, if you actually understand where it comes from, what we know is there is no shortage of money.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a complete scam, and we, the people, need to actually realize what the politicians are doing is they're following an agenda to destroy the armed forces so that we're forced into relying on the foreign armed forces of the European Union. So it's a takeover, isn't it?
Yes, it's a takeover. They're looking to form a one world government with a one world army, one world bank, one world currency system. That's the end game. While we're on the subject of the military, I'd like to go into the Iraq War with you, Roger, because I've sent you a Facebook over with some documents on it. But there was a story that broke on the Sunday Times, May the 1st, 2005. It's the leaked Downing Street memos, and it was strictly and secret, personal, UK eyes only. It's David Manning from Matthew Rycroft, and CC'd in is the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Attorney General, Sir Richard Wilson, John Scarlett, Francis Richards, CDS, C, Jonathan Powell, Sally Morgan, Alistair Campbell. So this is a real document from the Sunday Times that anyone can go on this and go on to Google and say, Sunday Times, Downing Street memo, May the 1st, 2005, you'll find it. And in there it says that the words, I shall read it to you, the Attorney General in himself said, this is the UK Attorney General said, that the desire for regime change was not a legal base for military action. There were three possible legal bases: self-defence, humanitarian intervention, or UNSC authorisation. The first and second could not be the base in this case. Relying on UNSCR 1205 of 3 years ago would be difficult. The situation might, of course, change. So let me just say that again. The Attorney General said that the desire for regime change was not a legal base for military action. Now, knowing that we went into Iraq supposedly for weapons of mass destruction, and now we know that there weren't. Now, at best case scenario, these people were incompetent with their military reports, and I'll bring up another document that says that this was not the case, most likely. The worst case scenario is that they deliberately lied to create war. Either as a result, it doesn't matter, there were no weapons of mass destruction. We've seen Tony Blair come on the TV and said, well, actually, I'm glad we went in. We wanted to change Saddam. It doesn't matter, Tony Blair. Regime change, in the words of the Attorney General, for its own sake in UK law, is illegal. What do you make of that?
They've broken the law, and I think we know that, they know that, and once again, nothing's being done about it. There's another job for the Commissioner, because let's not lobby Parliament. Let's actually ask these new independent commissioners, if that's truly what they're going to be, to instruct chief constables to arrest Tony Blair for an illegal act.
Yes. For
actually starting an illegal war, a breach of international law, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the cat is out of the bag. We know what's happened. We know what it was all about. Saddam Hussein was calling for the sale of oil to be done in euros, and the problem that the Americans have, of course, is that dollars were the international currency for buying oil, and if nations around the world were going to stop paying for oil with dollars, the American economy was going to collapse. That's exactly what happened with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was talking about a gold dinar, which once again meant that they were going to start paying for his oil in other currencies other than dollars, and as a direct consequence, once again, the U.S. economy would have collapsed. That's what the invasion was all about. They had no choice. And Bush and Blair trumped up this complete lie about weapons of mass destruction. David Kelly knew what was going on, and that's why he was murdered.
And let me just back you up on that. From the secret and personal documents released in the Sunday Times on May the 1st, 2005, it's actually said here, C, who isn't named, C reported on his recent talks in Washington. There was a perceptible, and this was from July the 23rd, 2002. This was when this was sent, well before the invasion. C reported on his recent talks in Washington. There was a perceptible shift in attitude. Military action was now seen as inevitable. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action, justified by the conjunction of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. But the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. The NSC had no patience with the UN route and no enthusiasm for publishing material on Iraq's regime's record. There was little discussion in Washington of the aftermath of military action. So there we've got it. That's July the 23rd, 2002. That's a lot of important people copied into this memo, and I repeat, the facts were being fixed around the policy, and there was little discussion in Washington of the aftermath of military action. So that backs up what you said. They fudged it, and they really didn't care what happened afterwards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we're now in a position where we can look at the history of things. We can think, well, we were a bit naive at the time, thinking that removal of this dictator Saddam was correct. Maybe some people are also still of the opinion that removal of Gaddafi was the right thing to do. But it's done us no favors, because what we now find ourselves in is the position where we've supposedly got the constant threat of terrorism. It's funny, when I go on my various trips, I get in the lift, and as you walk in the lift, they're telling me I can't smoke. They're telling me not to leave any baggages around. Or we're constantly being reminded about the control, and the terrorism is always in our face. Don't leave any baggage lying around, because the security personnel will remove them. And again, that subtle change. It used to be that the staff would remove your unsecured baggage or left baggage. Now it's the security personnel. So it's a constant drive to remind us of the threat of terrorism, the permanent threat of terrorism.
What do you make of the fact, Roger, of these terrorisms that we have to constantly give up our rights to, as we're told that we're under threats by terrorism, the main protagonist of which is Al-Qaeda? What do you make of the fact that half of the army in Syria is Al-Qaeda and the West is funding them? That's on record, people. You can go and you can Google that on the London Guardian. I've covered that on previous shows. The West is supporting the Free Syria movement, and half of the Free Syria movement is Al-Qaeda. The West is financially supporting Al-Qaeda. You are giving up, your listeners listen to the show, you are giving up your tax money, which could go to schools and hospitals, to finance Al-Qaeda. That is a fact that you can Google. That is London Guardian. Copy, have a listen to my previous shows. It's covered, it's documented, it's indisputed. What do you make of that, Roger Hayes?
Well, all right. Well, let's look at a couple of things. First and foremost, I don't believe in dictatorships. I think we should have democracies around the world, but the reality, of course, is we don't live in a democracy either. We live in a political dictatorship or parliamentary dictatorship. So if you look at Syria, they've got a system there, but the people of Syria do not like their system. It's up to the people of Syria to make the change. It's not for us to do so. And we should not be funding any terrorists anywhere. Our job, the job of the government is to look after the governments of this country and to defend this country. Now, I know some people will say it's a bit naive, not interfering with international affairs, etc. Well, yeah, but that's supposed to be done at the United Nations level through the talking shop. Not funding private armies, terrorists, or Al-Qaeda, which was originally established by the CIA anyway.
Yep, that's on record.
I believe that the real agenda behind this, of course, was that they wanted to get rid of all those nation-states that didn't actually have a central bank, which just happens to include Iraq, Iran, Syria, North Korea. And, of course, we know the next target after Syria is going to be Iran. And there's already been threats by Israel to bomb Iran, and on the basis that Iran is developing nuclear weapons.
Did you hear the Israeli lobbyist?
Nuclear weapons, but neither should Israel have nuclear weapons either.
Did you hear the Israeli lobbyist a few weeks ago come out and say, don't worry about Iran, if they don't attack us, we can do a false flag and make it look like they attack?
Exactly.
This is what they admit in public.
And not only that, he said, because that's what we've done on these previous occasions.
Yes, I actually did a whole show dedicated to how wars have started. We had interview with Secretary of Defence during the start of the Vietnam War, I'm not sure if he's a doctor, Robert McNamara, saying about the whole Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was the event that started the Vietnam War. In his own words, it didn't happen. Those are his exact words. It didn't happen.
Yeah, I actually watched that interview, and it didn't have me falling off my chair because I knew it already, but it was still incredible nevertheless, because they were blatantly just come out in the open and saying it. And, that is an expression of the arrogance, isn't it? It's telling us, look, there's nothing you can do about it. We can actually tell you that we had a false flag incident to give us the excuse to go to war in Vietnam. We can tell you about these false flag incidents, whether it's 9/11, 7/7. It does not matter if you find out because there's nothing you can do about it, or at least that's what they think.
And it's
But
our
of
job
course,
to
there is
prove them
something
wrong.
we can do about it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned how central banks play into all of this. Here's an article, August 29th. I'm not certain what year it is. It's from Bloomberg, but the headline is, JP Morgan Chase to run Iraq's trade bank, US says. And it reads, JP Morgan Chase and Company has been selected to operate a bank in the US is creating in Iraq to manage billions of dollars to finance imports and exports. Iraq will become important to these banks, McPherson, who was a top US economist, advisor to Iraq, told reporters in Washington in a conference call from Baghdad. These banks were making a view on the future of Iraq. Now, effectively, what that says is JP Morgan Bank was selected to run the Iraqi central bank, and that's going to make them a lot of money. Now, can you guess who Tony Blair, Roger Hayes, receives an advisory fee from every year that ranges anywhere between $500,000 and $3 million? We haven't got the exact figure, but can you guess which bank that it funds Tony Blair?
No, I couldn't.
It was
I couldn't
JP Morgan.
begin to guess.
Yeah. So we've got a situation where Tony Blair gets money from JP Morgan and he invades Iraq along with Bush on what the Attorney General said, in his own words, was illegal, and what the leaked memo says was fixed around the policy. And he gets paid by JP Morgan, and then JP Morgan gets the contract as a result of this invasion. That is money from war, isn't it? And do you have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, the one comment I will make, and I have made this in a number of my presentations, is that has anybody noticed how it is that so many of these politicians, when they leave office, they say they leave power, of course, they're in power, but I keep reminding them they're not in power, they're in office. But when they leave office, how many of them actually end up working for the bankers? And, you know, it's a backhander after the event, isn't it? So whilst the politicians were in office, they could have made a decision which was to issue our own money, saving the country billions upon billions upon billions of pounds and saving the taxpayers. 650 members of Parliament could make the decision to enact a legislation to take back control of the issuance of our money, but they won't do so. And what then happens? After they leave office, they're all rewarded by getting these lucrative contracts with bankers, and they're basically being paid off. It's corruption.
Yes, it is corruption. And President Eisenhower warned back on January 17th, 1961, of what he called the military-industrial complex, where bankers would finance the military. And the way this works, and I'm sure you'd like to comment on this, Roger, is the banks will finance often both parties, and the winner will owe the loser the debt, and the winner will owe the central bank who lent them the money in the first place. And of course, then they get the money from the interest on the debt, but they also make the money by owning the arms companies. So they make money from war. And President Eisenhower warned of this. You can go on YouTube, and his farewell speech. That was, in order for a president, when he's leaving office, to be able to make that speech, that must have been forefront on his mind. He must have been very concerned about it.
Yeah, and I think there was a man in probably one of the supposedly most powerful positions on the planet, almost helpless, realizing that there's nothing he could do about the power, the secret power behind closed doors of the military complex. But, you know, he wasn't the only one, because Kennedy, just prior to his assassination, warned about secret societies.
He did, yes.
And he spoke about the conspiracies. And, of course, he was talking about the exact same group of people who were operating behind the scenes, manipulating things by controlling the issuance of money. And as we know, presidential order, I think it was 11110, and effectively that was leading the country towards taking back control of the issuance of its own money, so that eventually America could be debt-free. And as we know, Kennedy was assassinated. That presidential order was never enacted, and as a direct consequence, now the Americans have something like £15 trillion worth of debt to pay off. And of course, that's what's causing the massive problems in America and around the world. The fact that the banks are still issuing our money, not governments, and as a direct consequence, we the people are paying massive taxes to pay debts the government has incurred.
Oh, can you hear me?
Because they... Yep.
Oh, you're still there? You were just breaking up slightly.
Sorry, can you
yeah,
hear
I can
me
hear you now.
now?
That's fine. Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, so as I was saying, that the issue being that the governments themselves have not taken back control of the issuance of money, and that we're all in debt as a direct consequence. Just interestingly enough, I was just doing some work this morning because I was just reading a report about the financial crisis of 1825. And, you know,
I haven't heard of this.
We don't know our history, and I'm sure that if we all sat down and spent a week reading our history, we would be actually shocked. But how many times the same banking crisis pops up out of nowhere, people are made bankrupt, people are made unemployed, and all they've got to do is change the banking system. And can I just mention, I don't want to talk on and on, but I can just mention that I've noticed a deluge of reports now coming out of universities about how the banking system is flawed and it should be changed. We've been saying this for several years now, and of course that's the work of the lawful bank. But extraordinarily, the International Monetary Fund has a working paper, and it's called the Chicago Plan Revisited. And it, of course, is talking about the very same things that we've been talking about with regards to the lawful bank. But you know what's missing? The one thing that's missing in all of these reports, which makes me suspect them, is that none of them are talking about the interest being charged on money. And that's the one thing that we all need to get rid of, and that's the charge of interest on loans on borrowed money, as well as removal of the issuance by banks.
And the listeners, if you need to understand how important that is, go into Google and look at national debt, and you will find that it sort of went along at about 500 billion level till about 2008, and then after 2008 it doubled to about 1,000 billion. And as a result of that, we now pay 42 billion a year, or we did in 2010, of interest to the banks. So let me just run this by you, Roger. We're already in debt to the banks by about 500 billion, and a great deal of this is throughout the wars, as we've been brought into. Now that doubles an extra 500 billion in 1 year. So our entire debt doubles in 1 year, and we give that money to the banks in the form of cash, credit default swap guarantees. We give the banks 500 billion, we give them free of charge, and then they lend it back to us at interest, which costs us 42 billion a year. I'm correct in saying that is exactly how it works, isn't it, Roger? I haven't missed anything there.
No, and in essence, we are borrowing from the banks, where the banks themselves don't actually have the money. So they create the money out of thin air, effectively. And my argument, of course, is that the government should do that. Actually, my argument is that it should be done at local level. I'm in favour of putting the creation of money into the hands of communities. The prerequisite is if the community wants to create its own money, it needs to be able to pay it back. That's the only criteria. And of course, it could do that interest-free. And I think that, again, the lawful bank has been directing itself and putting out a suggestion as to how the money system should work, how banking should work. And there is a place for banks, but it's not as the issuers of our money. It's merely to act as basically the collector or the middleman for the issuance of money. So the government should issue money, the government should issue money to the banks, and the banks should pay for the privilege and take if you like, a tiny fee for acting on behalf of the government for issuing the money to businesses and to private loans. And if it was done that way, the taxpayers wouldn't be paying £40-odd billion a year in taxes. We would be saving that. And remember that's every single year. It's 40 40-odd billion one year, then 40-odd billion in the next. We're £1 trillion in debt, and in 10 years we could pay off half that debt. And in fact, if the government issued its own money, it could effectively pay off the debt overnight.
Yes, and just to back up what you're saying about printing out of thin air, that is what quantitative easing is, any listeners. They press numbers on a computer and now the money appears. That is what quantitative easing is. It is opening up the printing presses. This is indisputed. They print money out of thin air, and just to extrapolate that, they'll then go and lend that money to the IMF, and the IMF will go and then lend that to countries like Africa, and they will then say that Africa can pay its debt back through its precious minerals and things. So they are literally getting oil, diamonds, whatever it is that the resources of a country is, through, they pay it to the IMF, but the money given to them, the IMF, was created out of nothing in the first place. It really is an absolute scam.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting thing about these African countries is that they could issue their own money, and obviously the corporations who want to buy from them would actually have to buy their money to do so, and that's how they get their exchange. They don't need to go and borrow money from the International Monetary Fund or anybody else. If they've got the resources, they have the actual backing for their own money, so they shouldn't be borrowing anything. And again, you've got to ask the question, well, surely there are people in those countries who understand that mechanism, and the answer is, yeah, of course there are people who understand it, but these people are just as corrupt as our lot.
Yep.
So they will borrow, put their own countrymen into debt because they are rewarded by having offshore bank accounts which has millions and millions of pounds in, courtesy of the IMF or whoever. So it's a criminal organisation that controls the international banking arena, and we pay the price, and it's got to be changed.
Yes. Now, while we're on the subject of the IMF, this is an article from London Guardian. It's the 29th of May 2012, and it's headed, Christine Lagarde, scourge of tax evaders, pays no tax. IMF boss, who caused international outrage when she suggested that Greeks should pay their taxes, earns a tax-free salary. Kim Walsher in Paris of The Guardian reports on Tuesday the 29th, 2012. IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde, the IMF boss who caused international outrage after she suggested in an interview with The Guardian on Friday that beleaguered Greeks might do well to pay their taxes, pays no taxes herself, it emerged, and she earns her salary of $467,940, that's £298,675 a year, plus $83,760 additional allowance, and is not subject to any taxes. So the people who say pay your taxes pay no taxes themselves. The banks who say yes, we've committed a crime, but we will face no jury, will just pay a fine, and we promise not to do it again, Your Honour. This is the very essence of tyranny. We're starting to really see it come to the forefront. It can't be hidden much longer, can it, Roger?
Well, no, but let me say this. This is good news. This is really good news that she doesn't pay any tax.
Yes.
Because it exposes the hypocrisy.
Yes.
And what we have, I mean, I'm glad the Greeks don't pay any taxes. I would like every Greek citizen to stop paying their taxes. Because if they stopped paying their taxes, their economy would boom.
Yeah.
Because all the waste would disappear. The government would be in no position to pay back the International Monetary Fund, and the economy of Greece itself would boom. And you know what the Greeks could do? They could literally declare a new currency and say to the International Monetary Fund, if you can show to us where you actually got the money from in the first place to lend to us, we'll pay it back. And guess what? They wouldn't be able to do that, because the International Monetary Fund didn't actually have that money. They have done, just like our banks have done, created the money out of nothing. And here's the most recent scam. The European Central Bank is calling for the creation of 700 billion euros, so that they can actually back government bonds throughout Europe. And where do you think the European Central Bank is going to get that £700 billion from?
Are they going to print it out of thin
They're going to
air?
it out of nothing, just like our bankers do. And as a direct consequence of that magic trick, the taxpayers in European countries are going to be paying yet more taxes. They're keeping them on the treadmill. They are scamming them at such an enormous level. But there's something else going on here. Why has the International Monetary Fund suddenly come up with this report that is suggesting that there is a better way to run the banking system? Do you think that because they know that we know, that they can't be seen not to know? Do you think that they're a bit scared now?
Yes, or they're using this crisis to engineer it ultimately along their path to dissolve the euro and bring about a one world currency. It's one of those two, Roger. But I know where you're going with it.
I certainly do believe that they're going that direction. But I believe there's conflict within the countries around the world. I believe the Chinese realise what's going on, and I'm not convinced that they want to play ball.
They left the stock market a few weeks ago, didn't they? Or a couple of months ago, they said the whole game's rigged in the US and the UK. We're not investing there anymore. I think you can just Google that if you want to see that for yourselves.
Yeah, and what China has been doing some time now, it's been selling us its wares at a price. We have been buying all of the goods from China. It's been stocking up its gold reserves and its money, and it's been investing in Africa. So it now controls the mineral resources in Africa because we were greedy. It's investing all around the world in South America. Once again, it's controlling a lot of the resources around the world. And when you control the resources, you actually control everything. So we're heading into a very dangerous period of I believe, commodity inflation because it's being controlled potentially by China.
But we also, I agree with 100% with what you're saying, and this is, for the life of me, I cannot figure it out to this day, whether the globalists, as they're called, the Bilderberg bankers, whatever you want to call them, the bankers at the heart of this conspiracy, and it's not a theory, it really is correct, we've discovered it on numerous occasions, they are in bed with China to a certain degree. So are they switching?
I can accept that. I can accept that you've got a global elite in China, a global elite in Russia, a global elite all around the world, and I suppose those individuals are looking after themselves. And I suppose the one thing that they realise that they're at risk is that if they start picking a fight with America, America is a very well-armed country, so they probably don't want to go down that road. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I accept it's a probability. But ultimately, we don't know the detail, do we?
No, that's absolutely. I can't figure it out whether the global elite are controlling China or whether they really are at odds with China, because they're certainly connected to them. I honestly cannot tell. From years of research, I've failed to figure that out yet. But with 2 minutes left to go, Roger Hayes, I want to go completely out left field. We've had the hurricane go and interfere with the election. We've got strong winds here. I take it you know about the United Nations Declaration and Convention Treaty of 1976, which is called the Convention of the Prohibition or Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. It's a weather weapons treaty. Roger Hayes, weather weapons exist, don't they? Sorry, what did you say? HAARP, HAARP for our listeners. Go look it up. We're just going to go out left field on that, but that's not tinfoil hat Bob saying that the government's got a magic lightning rod. That is the United Nations own website. You can go and see it for yourself. 1976 Treaty, Convention of the Prohibitions of Military or Other Use of Hostile Environmental Modification Techniques. Weather weapons exist. We're experiencing weird weather. Go look it up for yourselves, listeners. Roger Hayes, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you again, and hopefully we're going to get you on as a regular guest. Just plug your websites for me quickly before we go.
Okay, well, obviously, the lawfulbank.com, but also the bcgroup.org.uk, the bcgroup.org.uk. If people would join us, we'd greatly appreciate the increased membership.
And together we can help build a better world. Roger Hayes, thank you very much for joining us. Look forward to speaking with you again my
Been
friend.
a pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, mate.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. So that's it, listeners. Always a pleasure to talk with Roger. Talked to him off air a few weeks ago. He's going to come on the show on a more regular basis. So that's it for our Halloween. Have a very wonderful Halloween. But remember, the real gauls and scariness isn't in a mask of a trick-or-treater. It is in the tyranny of the government system being built around you. You need to start researching the facts. They're all there. They're not conspiracy theories. They're conspiracy facts. Listeners, we're moving into a dangerous time for humanity, but we can stand together and we can beat this. We've done it before. We'll do it again. I'll be here each and every Wednesday to give you tips on how to do that. Thank you very much for joining us. Cheers. Good night.